It wasn't the slap that shattered me. It was the look that followed, cold, dismissive, like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of dusting. My cheek burned where his hand had landed, but my heart, that had gone numb years before. I stood there in our marble kitchen, the kind of kitchen magazine editors dream about, and watched my husband of 32 years adjust his cufflinks like he'd just swatted a fly instead of striking his wife. "You're barren, Margaret," he said, voice flat and final. "What use are you to anyone?" The words hung in the air between us, sharp as broken glass. Outside, rain hammered against the windows of our estate. The estate my father had built, the one Charles claimed as his own the day we said, "I do." Thunder rolled across the hills, but inside that kitchen, the silence cut deeper than any storm ever could. I pressed a cold dishcloth to my face, feeling the sting bloom into something darker. Something I'd buried for 3 decades under polite smiles and perfect dinner parties and pretending not to notice the lipstick stains on his collars. If you've ever been underestimated, keep watching. This story is for you. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, watching raindrops race down the glass like the tears I refused to shed anymore. The woman looking back at me was 56 then, still holding on to the beauty that had first caught Charles's eye, but hollowed out somehow. Emptied. Something inside me broke tonight, I whispered to that reflection. Charles had already left the kitchen, probably heading to his study to pour himself a scotch and call whoever had left that perfume on his collar. He'd done this before, the staying out late, the mysterious phone calls, the cruel comments disguised as jokes at parties. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. I folded the dishcloth carefully, placed it on the counter with steady hands. My wedding ring caught the light, 2 carats of lies wrapped around my finger. I twisted it once, twice, remembering the girl I'd been when he slipped it on. Young, naive, so desperately in love I'd signed away everything without reading the fine print. But that night, something else was born, my plan. I met Charles Elwood on a Tuesday in spring, outside the library where I worked cataloging rare books. He'd come looking for a first edition Hemingway, and I'd found it for him in under 10 minutes. The way he looked at me then, like I was the rarest find in the building, should have been my first warning. But God, he was beautiful. Not just handsome, but magnetic in that way some men are when they know exactly what they want and how to get it. Dark hair swept back, eyes that held yours a beat too long, a smile that promised the world wrapped in white linen and champagne. "Marry me," he said on our 3rd date, right there in the middle of an art gallery, surrounded by paintings of broken things trying to be beautiful again. I laughed. Thought he was joking. He wasn't. 6 weeks later, I was Mrs. Charles Elwood, standing in my childhood home while my father signed over the deed to the estate as a wedding gift. Charles kissed my father's cheek, shook his hand, called him Dad, with such warmth that even I believed it. That first year felt like falling. Breakfast in bed, surprise trips to Paris, his hands always finding mine across crowded rooms. He'd built a career in finance, or so he told everyone, turning investments into gold with just his charm and business sense. What I didn't see, what I chose not to see, were the small moments when the mask slipped. The way his jaw tightened when I suggested visiting my college roommate. How he'd rewrite stories to make himself the hero, even when I'd been there and knew different. The subtle corrections at dinner parties when I'd speak too long or laugh too loud. "Let me handle this, darling," became his favorite phrase, usually said with that smile, the one that made refusal feel like betrayal. I didn't realize back then. Charm is just control wrapped in kindness. Do you believe love can blind a person completely? Let me know in the comments. My father died 2 years into our marriage, sudden and swift, leaving me grief-stricken and Charles suddenly in charge of everything. The estate, the investments, the small fortune my family had built over generations. He handled the funeral arrangements, the lawyers, the paperwork. "Don't worry about any of this," he'd said, kissing my forehead while I cried into black fabric. "I'll take care of everything." That's what husbands do. And I let him. Handed over every password, every document, every key to every door. Trusted him completely, because wasn't that what marriage meant? Two becoming one, sharing everything, no secrets between us? Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment the shift happened. We were at the lawyer's office, finalizing my father's estate, and Charles reached across the table to sign something. His sleeve rode up, and I caught a glimpse of his watch, brand new, expensive, the kind that costs more than most people make in a year. "When did you get that?" I asked. "This old thing." He smiled, pulled his sleeve down. "Had it forever, darling. You just never noticed." But I had noticed. I noticed everything about him back then, memorized every detail like a lovesick fool. That watch was new, paid for with money that came from somewhere he didn't want to explain. I opened my mouth to ask more, then closed it. Let it go. Pushed down that first seed of doubt before it could take root and grow into something I'd have to acknowledge. That was my mistake. The first of many. And one day, that charm would become my cage. The doctor's waiting room had beige walls and magazines nobody actually read, just flipped through to avoid making eye contact with other couples waiting for the same bad news we were about to get. "Mrs. Elwood," the specialist said, looking at his charts instead of at me. "I'm sorry, but the tests show." I didn't hear the rest. Something about eggs and timing and percentages that all added up to the same impossible math. I couldn't have children. Might never have children. My body had decided this for me. Without asking permission, without considering that I'd spent my whole life imagining tiny hands gripping my fingers and bedtime stories and Christmas mornings filled with laughter. Charles sat beside me, stone-faced, while I signed release forms with shaking hands. In the car, he didn't speak. Just drove us home in silence, so thick I could taste it, bitter and final. That was year 4. The year everything changed. The dinners grew quieter. His late nights at the office grew longer. And the comments. Oh, the comments started so subtle, I almost missed them. Sarah from accounting just had twins. He'd mention over breakfast. Voice carefully neutral. The Hendersons are expecting their third. He'd say at parties, then look at me with something close to pity. But the worst came at the mayor's gala. Champagne flowing like water, and Charles holding court with his business partners and their wives. I'd been standing right there, wearing the emerald dress he'd bought me, smiling like I was supposed to, when someone asked if we had children. "Margaret's children are her roses," Charles said, and the whole circle laughed. Not kind laughter. The other kind. The kind that strips you naked in a crowded room and leaves you standing there while everyone pretends not to notice. Would you have stayed or walked away by then? I want to hear your thoughts. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the stall door, and pressed my hand against my stomach, flat, empty, failing. The tears came hot and fast, and I bit my sleeve to keep quiet because even crying felt like giving them more ammunition. When I came back out, fixed my makeup, smoothed my dress, Charles was exactly where I'd left him, entertaining the crowd with another story about his latest business triumph. He didn't notice I'd been gone. Didn't notice I'd been crying. Didn't notice me at all. That became our pattern. Him shining in public, brilliant and beloved, while I faded into the background like wallpaper. Him staying out later, coming home smelling of cigars and secrets. Me pretending everything was fine while the house grew colder and the distance between us stretched into miles. I threw myself into gardening. Roses specifically. Dozens of varieties, each one demanding attention and care and patience. They needed me in a way nothing else did. They bloomed when I fed them, grew strong under my hands, gave beauty in return for love. Charles never understood it. Would walk past the garden without looking, track dirt across the floors I'd just cleaned, complain about the water bill when I spent too long with the hose. Still playing in the dirt? He'd ask, not even trying to hide the contempt. But the roses never talked back. Never made me feel small. Never looked at me like I was broken merchandise that couldn't be returned. One Tuesday night, Tuesdays were always bad for some reason, Charles came home from another business dinner and collapsed into bed without showering. I lay there in the dark, listening to his breathing even out, when he said it. Just a whisper, barely audible, but clear enough. Clara. Not my name. Another woman's name, said with the kind of tenderness he used to save for me, back when I was rare and worth finding. That night, I heard him whisper another woman's name in his sleep. The storm hit on a Thursday in October, the kind that rattles windows and makes tree branches claw at the roof like they're trying to get inside. I'd spent the evening in the library, reading the same page over and over because my mind wouldn't settle, couldn't focus, kept circling back to that name. Clara. Charles was supposed to be home by 8, then 9, then 10. At 11:30, headlights finally swept across the driveway. I heard his car door slam, his keys jangle, his footsteps uneven on the front steps. When he walked into the foyer, rain-soaked and loose-limbed, I knew before I even got close. Perfume. Not mine. Something floral and young, and deliberately expensive. You're late, I said, keeping my voice level. Meeting ran long. He brushed past me, heading for the stairs. I followed. Don't know why, except that something in me snapped, some wire that had been pulled too tight for too long finally gave way. Charles. What? He spun around, and there it was in his eyes, guilt mixed with annoyance, like I was the one causing problems by noticing. Who is she? Wrong question. I knew it the second the words left my mouth, knew from the way his expression shifted from defensive to dangerous. Excuse me? The perfume. The name in your sleep. The late nights. My voice cracked. Just tell me the truth. He came down 3 steps, closing the distance between us, and I backed up on instinct. Something about his posture, the set of his jaw, warned me this wasn't going to end well. You want the truth? His voice dropped low, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The truth is you've been useless to me for years, Margaret. Can't give me children. Can't give me the family I wanted. Can't give me anything except those damned roses and your martyred silences. If you're still here, hit subscribe. The best part of the story hasn't even begun. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. 1 second I was standing there, mouth open to respond, and the next my head snapped sideways, cheek exploding in white-hot pain that radiated down my neck and into my chest. I stumbled back against the wall, hand flying to my face, too shocked to cry, too stunned to speak. Charles stood there on the stairs, breathing hard, looking at his hand like it belonged to someone else. For a second, just 1 second, I thought I saw regret flicker across his face. Then it hardened again. You're Barren, he said, each word deliberate as a knife thrust. What use are you to anyone? He turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me crumpled against the wall in the foyer of the house my father built, the house Charles now treated as his own kingdom where I was just another servant he'd grown tired of keeping. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain pounded harder. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, cold marble seeping through my nightgown, hand still pressed to my burning cheek. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked its judgment. Fool, fool, fool. How had I gotten here? How had the girl who used to catalog rare books and dream of Paris become this woman huddled on her own floor, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip? I thought my story had ended that night. My marriage was over. My dignity in pieces. My heart finally, completely, irreparably broken. But it was only the prologue to his downfall. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't cry either, which surprised me. Just sat in the kitchen with an ice pack pressed to my face, watching dawn break cold and gray through the windows. Something had shifted. Not broken. Breaking implies pieces scattered everywhere, chaos, emotion. This was different. This was ice forming over deep water, hard and clear and perfectly still. Charles left early, before I came downstairs. Left his coffee cup in the sink and his briefcase by the door like nothing had happened, like he hadn't struck his wife and called her worthless 12 hours earlier. I washed his cup, put it away, made myself toast I didn't eat. Then I went to his study. The door was usually locked, but I'd watched him punch the code into the keypad 100 times. 0-8-1-2. August 12th. The day we got married. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside, his desk was exactly what you'd expect from a man like Charles. Leather chair, mahogany surface polished to a mirror shine, file cabinets labeled and organized because control was his favorite hobby. I started with the bottom drawer. Found bank statements going back 5 years, investment portfolios in his name, property deeds I'd never seen before. My hands stayed steady as I photographed each page with my phone, methodical as the librarian I used to be, cataloging evidence instead of books. The estate deed, my father's estate, the one Charles always called ours, was filed under C for Charles, not E for Elwood family property. Interesting. Ever heard the phrase, revenge is a dish best served cold? Wait till you see how she serves it. I kept digging. Found credit card statements showing charges at hotels I'd never stayed at, restaurants I'd never eaten in, jewelry purchases I'd never received. Found emails printed out and filed away, probably because Charles was too arrogant to think I'd ever look. One email, dated 3 months earlier, made my blood run cold. Clara, the property transfer should be complete by December. Once Margaret's out of the picture, we can finally move forward with our plans. Love you. C. Out of the picture. Such a polite way to erase a person. I photographed that one twice, making sure the date and sender were clear. Then I kept searching because if there was one smoking gun, there had to be more. Found them in the back of the 3rd drawer, hidden under tax returns from 2015, forged documents with my signature, transferring ownership of my father's assets to Charles.
Date modifications.
Investment releases. Everything legal and binding and completely fraudulent because I'd never signed any of it. My father's money, the fortune he'd built through decades of careful investments and hard work, hadn't been a wedding gift to both of us. Charles had stolen it, piece by piece, signature by signature, while I grieved and trusted and looked the other way. I realized Charles had built his kingdom on my father's money. I sat back in his leather chair, documents spread across the desk like cards in a rigged game. Outside, gardeners trimmed the hedges I'd planted, maintaining the grounds Charles told everyone he designed. His car sat in the driveway next to mine older, practical, invisible. His newer, flashier, paid for with funds that should have been split between us. Everything he had, everything he was, rested on a foundation of lies and my signature forged in ink that probably cost more than my wedding ring. My phone buzzed. Text from Charles. Dinner with clients tonight. Don't wait up. I texted back. Of course. Have fun. Put the documents back exactly as I'd found them. Locked the study. Went upstairs and started printing the photos, organizing them into folders, building my case with the same careful attention I'd once used to arrange flowers. This wasn't about anger anymore. Anger burns hot and fast and leaves nothing but ash. This was about something colder, cleaner, more permanent. This was about justice. And soon, that kingdom would belong to me again. I packed his favorite lunch that Tuesday, roast beef sandwich, apple slices, the imported cookies he liked from that shop downtown. Put it all in the wicker basket like I was June Cleaver playing housewife in some twisted remake where everyone knows how it ends, but keeps watching anyway. Charles's office was 20 minutes from the house, glass and steel and marble floors that echoed with the sound of money changing hands. I'd been there maybe 3 times in 30 years, always for company parties where wives were expected to stand around looking grateful for their husband's success. The receptionist recognized me. Mrs. Elwood. What a lovely surprise. Just bringing Charles lunch, I said, holding up the basket. Is he in? He's in his office. Go right up, you know the way. I did know the way. Down the hall with its framed photos of Charles shaking hands with mayors and senators and other men who smiled too wide for the camera. Past the conference room where deals got made and lives got ruined on paper signed in triplicate. Right to the corner office with his name on the door in gold letters. I didn't knock. The door swung open and there they were, frozen like a photograph I'd never be able to unsee. Charles in his desk chair, and Clara, 20-something, blonde, wearing a skirt that barely qualified as clothing, perched on his lap with her arms around his neck. Would you confront the mistress or let karma handle it? Tell me below. They turned at the sound of the door. Clara scrambled off his lap, smoothing her skirt with hands that shook just enough to be satisfying. Charles stood, face cycling through surprise, guilt, annoyance, landing finally on defensive anger. Margaret, what are you doing here? I held up the basket. Brought you lunch. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Clara looked at me, then at Charles, then back at me, like she was trying to calculate whether to apologize or brazen it out. She chose brazen. I should go, she said, grabbing her purse. Yes, I said. You should. She rushed past me, leaving a cloud of that same perfume I'd smelled on Charles weeks ago. The perfume that had been the beginning of the end, though I hadn't known it then. Charles moved toward me, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. Let me explain. Don't. That one word stopped him cold. Maybe because I said it so calmly, or maybe because he heard something new in my voice, something that hadn't been there before. Something sharp and final. I set the basket on his desk, right where Clara's rear had been seconds earlier. Enjoy your lunch, Charles. Then I turned and walked out. Didn't run. Didn't cry. Didn't scream or throw things or make a scene that would give him ammunition to call me crazy or emotional or unstable. Just walked out with my head high and my hands steady and something cold and perfect forming in my chest where my heart used to be. The elevator ride down felt like descending from one life into another. The woman who'd gone up was still clinging to hope, still believing maybe this could be fixed, still afraid of being alone. The woman who came down was done hoping. That's the day I stopped crying. I drove home in silence, parked in the garage, walked through the house to the garden. My roses were blooming, deep reds and soft pinks and one white variety I'd babied for 3 years until it finally took root. I knelt in the dirt, hands working soil and stems, and let my mind work through the problem like an equation that just needed the right formula. Charles had money, had power, had connections and lawyers, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. But I had something he didn't: patience and documentation. And 32 years of watching him operate, learning his patterns, understanding exactly how his mind worked. He thought I was weak, broken, too scared to fight back. That was going to be his biggest mistake. And started calculating. The next 3 months, I became someone Charles didn't recognize, which was easy, since he'd never really known me at all. I smiled more, laughed at his jokes at dinner parties, asked about his day like I genuinely cared, played the perfect wife so convincingly that even I almost believed it. You seem happier lately, he said one morning over coffee. I've just been doing a lot of thinking, I told him, about what really matters. He actually looked pleased, like he thought I'd finally accepted my place. Accepted that this, the cheating, the cruelty, the slow erasure of everything I used to be, was just how marriage worked. Men like Charles always underestimate quiet women. They mistake silence for acceptance, patience for weakness, planning for obedience. Behind the scenes, I was building a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. The forged signatures went to a handwriting expert who confirmed what I already knew. Not mine, not even close. The property transfers got reviewed by a lawyer, not our family lawyer who played golf with Charles every Thursday, but a woman downtown who specialized in fraud and looked at my documents with eyes that got sharper with every page. Mrs. Elwood, she said, do you understand what you have here? Evidence that my husband stole my inheritance. Evidence that your husband committed multiple felonies. She tapped the papers. Forgery, fraud, theft, possibly tax evasion depending on how he reported these transfers. This is serious. If you've ever chosen silence as your weapon, double-tap the story. But the documents were just the foundation. I needed more. Needed to show his business partners, the men who treated Charles like a golden boy, who trusted him with their investments, who had no idea his entire empire was built on stolen money and fraudulent papers. So I started making calls. Quiet ones from coffee shops and the library, never from home. Reached out to investors Charles had worked with, Asked careful questions disguised as concern. I'm worried about Charles, I'd say. He's been so stressed lately. I just want to make sure everything's okay with the Wellington project. And they'd talk. Men always talk when they think a worried wife needs reassurance. Told me about deals that seemed shaky, investments that weren't performing like Charles promised, concerns they had but brushed aside because Charles was so good at selling confidence. I took notes. Cross-referenced names and amounts. Built a timeline showing exactly when Charles's fortunes had turned. Right after my father died, right after he'd gotten his hands on money that wasn't his to take. One investor, Richard Morrison, was different. Sharper. Asked more questions than he answered. Mrs. Elwood, why are you really calling? I paused, measuring my words. Because I think my husband might be putting your money at risk. And you want to help me? I want justice. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, meet me for coffee. Bring documentation. We met at a cafe 40 minutes from home, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone Charles knew. Richard was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with the kind of face that looked like it didn't suffer fools or lies. I slid the folder across the table. He read through it slowly, face darkening with every page. Jesus Christ. There's more, I said. The Wellington Grand project he's pitching? The luxury hotel development? That's funded with money he embezzled from my father's estate. If it fails, and from what I understand about the market, it probably will, everyone invested loses everything. And Charles? Charles will blame the market, the economy, bad luck. He'll walk away clean because he always does. Richard looked at me with something like respect. What do you want? One investor asked, Mrs. Elwood, do you want revenge? No, I said and meant it. I want justice. I want the truth exposed before more people get hurt. And I want what's mine returned to me, my father's money, my family home, my name cleared from whatever mess Charles creates when this falls apart. That's not revenge. I smiled. Felt it crack across my face like ice breaking. Revenge is emotional. This is just math. Add up the lies, subtract the fraud, divide the assets fairly. The equation solves itself. Richard closed the folder. The Wellington Grand Dinner is in 2 weeks. All the major investors will be there. Charles is presenting his final pitch. I know. I'm expected to attend. Good.
He met my eyes.
Bring copies of everything. All of it. I'll make sure the right people see what kind of man they've been trusting with their money. We shook hands across the table, sealing a deal that would destroy my husband's world and rebuild mine from the ashes. I smiled and said, No, I want justice. The Wellington Grand Hotel rose 30 stories above the city, all glass and gold, and the kind of luxury that made you feel rich just standing in the lobby. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Marble floors reflected everything back in perfect, polished detail. The kind of place where Charles felt at home, surrounded by wealth he'd borrowed and charm he'd weaponized. I dressed carefully that night. Silver gown, simple but elegant. Pearl earrings my mother had given me. Hair swept up to show my neck, my shoulders, the woman I'd been before Charles tried to erase her. Charles met me at the car, looking sharp in his tuxedo, and actually smiled. You look beautiful tonight. Thank you. He offered his arm. I took it. We walked into that hotel, like the perfect couple, the kind other people envied from across crowded rooms. No one looking at us would have guessed that in my purse, nestled between lipstick and car keys, was a brown envelope that would end everything. The dinner was in the penthouse ballroom, round tables set with china so fine you could see light through it. Charles's investors filled the room, powerful men and their wives, all drinking champagne and talking business in voices that carried confidence like cologne. Stay tuned. This is where his lies begin to crumble. Charles worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing too loud, telling stories that made him the hero of every narrative. I followed behind, smiling and nodding, playing my role so well that even I was impressed. Margaret, one of the wives, Patricia something, grabbed my arm. Your husband is brilliant. James says this Wellington project is going to make us all rich. Charles certainly hopes so, I said. We took our seats. Charles at the head of the investors' table, me beside him like a decorative piece of silverware. The first course arrived, some tiny, artful arrangement of food that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Charles squeezed my hand under the table. Thank you for being here tonight. I know these dinners bore you. Not at all, I said. I wouldn't miss this for the world. He had no idea how true that was. Dinner progressed through 4 more courses, each more elaborate than the last. Charles gave his presentation between the entree and dessert, slides showing projected profits. Architectural renderings of the hotel expansion, charts that climbed upward in aggressive, confident lines. The Wellington Grand isn't just an investment, he said, standing at the podium with all eyes on him. It's a legacy, something we build together that will outlast all of us. Applause rippled through the room. Charles beamed, feeding on their approval like oxygen. I reached into my purse, felt the envelope's edge, crisp and final. Richard Morrison caught my eye from across the table, gave the smallest nod.
It was time.
I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. Charles glanced at me, momentarily confused, then returned to his investors, probably assuming I was heading to the restroom. Instead, I walked to the head of the table where Charles had spread his presentation materials, placed the brown envelope right on top of his projections. Let my hand rest there for just a moment, feeling the weight of what came next. Gentlemen, I said, voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Before dessert arrives, I think you should see what you're really investing in. Charles's face went pale. Margaret, what are you? Open it, I said to Richard.
He did.
Pulled out the documents, the forged signatures, the embezzlement proof, the timeline showing exactly how Charles had built his empire on my father's stolen money. Passed pages around the table while Charles stood frozen at the podium, watching his kingdom crumble in real time. He had no idea what that envelope in my purse held. The investors' faces changed as they read. Confusion shifted to shock. Shock hardened into fury. One man stood up, so fast his chair tipped backward. This is insane, Charles said, voice pitching higher. She's lying. She's upset because you've been embezzling from your own wife? Richard's voice cut through the room like steel. Because you forged her signature to steal her inheritance? Because you've been funding her projects with fraudulent money? More investors started gathering their things. Some threw napkins on the table in disgust. Others just stared at Charles like he was something they'd scraped off their shoes. And before dessert, I would end his empire with one gesture. Charles tried to grab the documents from Richard's hands. You don't understand. This is a misunderstanding. Margaret's confused. She doesn't understand business. I understand fraud, I said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to me. I understand that you forged my signature on property transfers. That you stole my father's estate and used it to fund your projects. That every success you've celebrated was built on money you had no right to touch. That's not. Charles's voice broke. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, finding none. Someone get her out of here. She's hysterical. Actually, Richard said, standing and holding up the documents, she's methodical. These are handwriting analyses, legal reviews, financial records showing exactly how you moved money from accounts you claimed were jointly held. Want to explain why your wife's signature looks so different on these property transfers? Charles's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Another investor, James, Patricia's husband, slammed his palm on the table. I put $2 million into this project because I trusted you. Because you showed me projections and profit margins and promised this was solid. If that moment gave you chills, let me know in the comments. It is solid, built on embezzled funds. James's face went red. Do you understand what this means? If the authorities investigate, we're all potentially implicated in money laundering. Our reputations, our businesses, everything's at risk because you're a fraud. More voices joined in, anger rising like a wave about to crash. Charles backed toward the podium, hands raised like that would somehow stop what was happening. I stood perfectly still, watching him realize, maybe for the first time in his life, that charm wasn't going to save him. That smiles and excuses and deflection weren't enough when the numbers told the truth. Margaret. He turned to me, desperate now.
Please.
Don't do this.
We can work this out.
I made mistakes, but we can fix this together. Together? The word tasted bitter. Like how we were together when you stole my inheritance. When you cheated with Clara. When you slapped me and called me Barren. The room went silent. Even the angry investors stopped, shocked by that last detail. Charles's face flushed. I never. Don't lie. My voice didn't shake, didn't waver. You've built your whole life on lies, Charles. About who you are, where your money came from, what kind of man you really are under all that expensive cologne and fake charm. I picked up my purse, checked that I had my car keys. These gentlemen have copies of everything. Documentation, expert analyses, enough evidence to bury you in civil suits even if you somehow dodge criminal charges. You destroyed yourself, Charles. His face crumpled. I gave you everything. You took everything. I met his eyes, let him see how far I'd come from that woman crying in the bathroom at parties. The house my father built, the money he earned, the life I should have had. You took it all, and convinced me I should be grateful you kept me around at all. Security appeared in the doorway. Richard must have called them during the chaos. Mr. Elwood. One guard said, "We need you to leave. Hotel management has been informed of the situation." Charles looked around wildly, searching for escape routes that didn't exist. This is ridiculous. I'm presenting an investment opportunity. The investment opportunity is over, Richard said flatly. Consider every contract void. We'll be in touch through our lawyers. Security was called. Charles started toward me, and I didn't flinch, didn't step back. Just stood there while two security guards intercepted him, hands on his arms, guiding him toward the door. Margaret. He shouted my name like an accusation, like I was the one who'd betrayed him instead of the other way around. You can't do this. That house is mine. That money is mine. Actually, I said, voice carrying across the ballroom one final time, it never was. And as he shouted my name, I simply walked away. The elevator doors closed on the sound of Charles's voice, still protesting, still lying, still unable to accept that the game was over and he'd lost. I rode down 30 floors in perfect silence. Walked through the lobby where people were starting to whisper, news spreading like wildfire that something scandalous had happened upstairs. Got in my car, started the engine, pulled out of the parking garage into city streets that suddenly felt wider, cleaner, full of possibility. I didn't cry, didn't celebrate, just drove home, to the house that would legally be mine again once the lawyers finished sorting through Charles's mess, and poured myself a glass of wine. Stood in my garden under stars I'd forgotten were there, surrounded by roses I'd kept alive through everything. And finally I breathed. The aftermath came in waves, each one pulling away more pieces of the life Charles had built on lies. The investors sued. All of them, coordinated by Richard into one devastating legal assault that left Charles scrambling between lawyers and bankruptcy courts. The Wellington Grand project collapsed within a month. The bank foreclosed on properties Charles had leveraged against money he'd embezzled. Clara disappeared. Read about it in the society pages. She'd moved to California with some tech executive who actually had his own money. Left Charles a note, allegedly, that just said, "Sorry, but I don't do poor." The criminal charges took longer. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. Each one carrying sentences that added up to years Charles would spend answering for what he'd done. His trial made regional headlines. Local businessman accused of embezzling dead man's fortune. I didn't attend. Sent my lawyer instead. Watched from home as justice happened in courtrooms and conference rooms and police stations that smelled like burnt coffee and broken promises. The house, my father's house, got returned to me through court order. The estate funds, what was left after Charles's failed ventures, came back slowly. Not all of it. Some money was just gone, lost to bad investments and luxury cars and jewelry he'd bought for women who weren't his wife. But enough came back. Enough to matter. I sold the house. Too many ghosts in those rooms. Too many memories of who I'd been when I was smaller, quieter, convinced that love meant disappearing. Bought a cottage on the coast instead. Small, weathered, with garden space and windows that let in light without judgment. Took my roses with me, transplanted them to soil that smelled like salt and new beginnings. Sometimes I still hear the rain and remember that night. Mornings there I paint. Nothing fancy. Watercolors of the ocean, the cliffs, the garden I'm building from scratch. Art had been my minor in college, back before Charles convinced me I didn't need hobbies or dreams or anything except him. Turns out I was pretty good at it. Turns out I was good at a lot of things once I stopped letting someone else tell me I wasn't. Charles got 7 years. Served 4 before parole. Read about his release in the newspaper. He looked older, smaller, like prison had finally taught him that actions had consequences. He tried to call once. I didn't answer. Had nothing to say to him. That silence didn't say better. People ask me sometimes if I'm lonely. If I regret leaving, burning down 32 years of marriage in one dinner at a luxury hotel. I tell them the truth. I've never been less lonely in my life. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Between silence chosen and silence enforced. Between walking away and running away. I walked away, head high, evidence in hand, knowing exactly what I was doing and why. The moral took me 68 years to learn, but it stuck. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Patience isn't passive. The quietest voice often delivers the loudest justice. Charles thought I was broken, barren, useless. He was wrong about all of it. And when I smile now, it's because I know the loudest sound in that dining hall wasn't my words. It was the silence I left behind. The silence that said, I'm done. I'm free. You no longer get to define me. And that silence? That was everything. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. We've got more tales of strength, justice, and people who refuse to stay silent when it mattered most. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time you chose silence as your weapon, or when you finally spoke up and changed everything. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it today. Remember, real power doesn't shout. It whispers. And sometimes it says nothing at all.